Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We got another character concept for you today. Now, when the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything first came out, the subclass that I think got the biggest upgrade, or at least had, thematically a really good thing going on, I thought was the Sorcerers. Now, I haven't played many Sorcerers outside of these two subclasses, but these two subclasses really spoke to me, and I think that's because they are themed around aspects of the game that I'm rather fond of. So I'm going to start with the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer. That'll be the topic of today's video. Now, the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, right, is inspired by Order, the plane of Order known as Mechanus. And for those of you who have been watching my other videos, you know that I'm a big AdMech fan, so you can maybe see the parallels there. So Mechanus is the plane of Order, of Law. It is the extreme on the wheel of order and law. They have these lovely little guys called monodromes who probably were the inspiration behind the minions, but cooler. And they have all these weird geometric people. So the plane of Mechanus will kind of be the initial inspiration and the creatures and denizens of it and how that would affect the design of this character. So one big thing is it has a very clockworky kind of aesthetic, right? Hence the name Clockwork Soul. So, what I like to do is if it's a humanoid, right, and not a robot, if you're playing a setting that has access to Warforged or other automaton, that would be a really easy way to do this. Although I find it more unsettling when something is still, flesh and bone, still biological in nature, than mechanical, because when they have a lot of the traits and kind of visual signifiers of something, man-made or mechanical, yet they are, still a person, still like flesh and blood, still, a biological animal, I think it's more unsettling. But you can dial up the creepiness depending on if you want this to make this a villain or if you want to just have a weird creepy character or something of that nature. You can dial it up, dial it down. The premise has a lot of flexibility on that aspect. So I wrote down some notes for myself to try and help me recall this character. I did play this character for a one shot, a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, and initially my idea was that I wanted to make someone that was kind of too good, right? Someone of royalty, of high standing, someone who's been a member of the bureaucracy.
Cover me! Oh man! I don't want to shoot nobody! They're just robots, Morty! It's okay to shoot them, they're robots! Ah! My leg is shut up! Glenn's bleeding to death! Someone call his wife and children! They're not robots, Rick! It's a figure of speech, Morty! They're bureaucrats! I don't respect them! Just keep shooting!
And I guess I should go into what order is or what law is, because if you haven't been playing Dungeons and Dragons, or if you're watching this video and you want to use this character concept for any myriad of games, I guess I really should give you kind of a foundation. So in D&D, there is 4 poles. There is lawful, order, there is chaotic, chaos, there is good, and then there's evil, right? So these creatures are the extreme of the order and of the law. So things like organization is a big deal. Even their ranking structure, literally, they are shaped different shapes so that you can easily identify their station and what their purpose is at a single glance. They will follow the code, the law to the letter. There is no playing around. There is no like skirting the rules. You can't really bribe them. They are by the book. They will follow the procedures to a T, to their fault, which makes a fantastic role playing opportunity for if you're playing with someone like that to, use their own kind of rules against them. Or by breaking the rules, you can force them into situations where they almost get stuck because they're forced to, act out a certain thing a certain way, which how a computer program will freak out if you break out of the established parameters. So for those of you who have not been to a heavily like bureaucratic business or have worked in one, I guess I can give you some perspective because I have done that. I think the quintessential kind of thing that you can use that'll really give anyone an understanding of how bureaucratic a group or organization is quickly without needing to, dive into the history or structure is forms. They love their forms. Form isn't filled out perfectly exactly the way they expect it. Make them redo the form. Little things like that I think can be annoying. Get your point across and be kind of quick, like just little things like that. The player is interacting with, for example, a member of the Mechanus. There's a form, it might ask them for their rank with acronyms. Obviously, the monodromes are going to know what the acronym is for monodrone, and the players will probably not fit into any of their ranks, right? Them not having or knowing, what to put, for example, could be a reason. And of course, if anything's blank, it gets kicked all the way back. So you can do things like that. But to get back to the singular character, right? This person isn't a member of Mechanus, right? They're not from that realm, but they are inspired by them. They are influenced by them in some way. Like I said previously, I really like the idea of royalty or privilege because if they have access to the abilities of Mechanus, there must be a reason, right? They must be of some sort of station that would give them this option to use these powers. They wouldn't just be giving this to random people because that's not their style, right? That's not how they work. Giving people things randomly or without, cause and forms and the proper documentation of why they have these abilities is something chaos people would do. And, this is the Canis we're talking about. They have prestige, they have dignity, they have an institution to uphold. And I think that's kind of the mindset that you need to have. Think of the most pompous person you can think of who went to the, I don't know, best school or works at the fanciest place and, just kind of embody that person that you probably have interacted with at some point in your life, or at the very least, has seen a character of that style. Now, for physical characteristics, something I like to do is I like to pick a metal and use that as like their hair color, their eye color, as like an accent color, something rather metallic. So, for example, gold is a good one, copper, bronze. I tend to pick something that's colored because I think, silver hair, when you describe silver hair, people think of gray hair, like people will call regular gray hair silver, but they don't call blonde hair gold. They don't call, like reddish hair bronze hair. So I think try to get away from words that already describe normal hair colors and be specific. Be like, that their hair shines like metal. Another thing is I like to make their flesh look like a stone of some description. Um, for my last character, I wanted them to look very, you know, pompous because they were royalty. So I used porcelain with like golden hair. And the hair didn't look like hair. It looked like it was thicker and looked like almost strands of metal descending down. And they were, very clean. They cared very deeply about their appearance because their appearance and uniform is part of their station. So, just like getting blood on them was unseemly, things like that. Having spells like prestidigitation to clean yourself off is a given. Being worried about how they would look, posing certain ways, giving them kind of these weird, almost robotic movements where they should kind of move from one pose to the next pose. And they don't ever like really move very naturally because they're either trained by the courts and in doing so, they almost look robotic in the way they move from, one position to the other. You can make it very unsettling. Like, you could see, like, when they're smiling at you, their face is smiling, but their eyes don't seem to have any joy in them. You can really play on, the window to the soul of the eyes and how they don't match the movements or the expressions of the body. And that can be a good way to tell your player something's off if you're running this character as an NPC. Titles are another great way of doing it. Overly formal titles that may be difficult, but they have to use. Same thing with maybe ways they would address the players. You could do something like that of a butler that always has to say the master, whatever. Weird greetings, almost archaic ways of introducing people, or maybe like if you're in your setting, people shake hands, they would shake hands the olden way by like, grabbing someone's forearm. Or if in this setting they normally do that, then make it where they like do like a curtsy or a bow, whatever the norm is. Pick something that would be not the norm in your setting, that would be like the older way of doing things. Try to pick things that have archaic relics of the past in more formal societies. And even though, the average person has not been interacting with people in that way for a long time, they still do so. I think another easy way to integrate that is in their speech. You could have them speak in almost a Shakespearean way. You could have them use slang from a different time period. It's still within your home language that the average person would still know what it meant, but like hasn't been said commonly for, a generation or 2 is another great way to kind of add to that feel. Now, if the individual is a caster that you're using this for, I like to make it where they have to do something unique for each spell, some sort of thing to it. You could do something more subtle. You could steal the hand movements from like Naruto or something like that. Something, something weird to cast spells that's unique for each spell. I also really like the idea of hearing like the ticking of a clock or things like that. Maybe they have to, when they say their incantations, to do their spells, if it's a verbal spell, maybe they're always in time. They say it rhythmically, like, like a metronome, just like always on time, on beat, giving them that, sense of rhythm. You can also do that and they're talking, but they always speak in, fours and four bars. If you're more musically inclined, feel free to kind of add that as part of it. You don't necessarily have to make it singy, the voice, you don't have to sing while you're doing it, but speak in a manner that was on beat or on pace. And you can using that kind of like weird juddery speech can also be another way of adding that unsettling kind of feeling that you can dial up or down dependent. Now, if you are a player and you're a character, you could be totally like, you could hide this fact from your party members at first, right? Because they're a lower birth. But then when they're around, maybe they're going to go meet a local mayor or they're in a town, like how they change from when they are in the wilderness could be another way of doing it. So maybe you initially meet this person outside of town and they engage with you a certain way, but as soon as they get into town, they start doing all these weird things. That could be a fun little moment as well, because then, the players might be wondering, hey, is this guy like possessed or something? What's going on? Another thing that you can do is when you're talking about magic, right? And you are one of these people, magic is like math, right? It is a mathematical thing that you can prove. Magic isn't this, whimsical force of the world that you can harness. It's like something that is cold and calculated. That's another kind of thing about the order is it's very calculated, very methodical. So you can do things like, maybe there's a series of glyphs that appear and make required to make the spells, with the beats, they're on beat, they're like drawing symbols with their fingers that are glowing and the different glyphs make different things. And the way they would describe their magic to someone would be like someone trying to explain to a very high level of calculus or algebra, or theoretical mathematics. It's something above the heads of those, non-initiated, and you could just look up some, random terminology from math. I think an easy one that's really simple, but they love throwing fancy symbols in math is like alephs. I think that's how you say it. It's a Hebrew character. It's just different forms of infinity. Everyone knows what infinity is. Not everyone knows that there's just subsets of infinity. You could talk about things like that, like subsets of infinity and different forms of infinity being larger than each other. And that is already pretty weird to some people that, don't study math of any kind. That's just an example of this weird kind of math fact that you can use as a description for magic, right? Like each school of magic is a subset of energy in the universe that you can call upon with different glyphs, and certain schools are larger than others, but all the schools are infinite in their own way. So there's infinite amounts of energy in those subsets, much like Aleph Null is all the whole numbers. It's like 1 through whatever, infinite. Then I think Aleph 1 is the infinite amount of values between 0 and 1, because obviously decimals can go on forever, right? Like you can have an infinite number of parts of something, and it can be split an infinite number of times. That's one of the subsets. And then there's one that includes all negative numbers, no whole numbers. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. That's just an example of a way you could describe the magic and the understanding of it. And a lot of this you can get from the Clockwork Soul section of the Tasha's Guide to Everything under manifestations of order. Now, on here, it tells you to pick one and it's for when you cast your spells. But when I was doing it, man, I just took all of them and I just was like, all right, if I wanted to do all of these, how would I do all of these? How would I flesh them out? Which ones are cool ideas? Which ones would be annoying? And how do I find the logical conclusion of these? I don't like the very coggy design that they mentioned. They mentioned things like, special cogs or like clockwork animals appearing, I think that's a bit too on the nose. You can do that if you want. I think if you're gonna do something like the fly spell, having like a disc of zinch, but it's like a cogwheel instead of like the discs, could be kind of a cool way of doing it. Of course, if you're taking the suggestion I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and you are indeed playing some sort of automaton or warforged or some, other mechanical creature, and you're using this idea and concept and you're branching it out that way, of course, feel free to use a bunch of cogs. It makes 100% sense for you to do it that way. Again, personally, I think it's much more unsettling when something non-mechanical, something, that is flesh and blood, acts in an extremely mechanical nature than it is if it's truly mechanical. I think the opposites also kind of unsettling to the average person, where they see something very mechanical and they expect it to be machine-like, yet it's very human, or acts in a way of, a creature that, is not of mechanical type. I think subverting that expectation tends to add a little bit of unsettlingness to it. If you want to get real wild with it, you can use images from the Uncanny Valley effect to kind of really creep your players out. There are plenty of examples of weird CGI or weird silicon robots that have that real uncanny valley kind of effect on people. If you're not familiar with the uncanny valley effect, I've probably put one of them on the screen by now, and I apologize if it's freaking you out. But yeah, it's a psychological effect that many people have, believed to be caused by our survival instincts to stay away from dead things. So when we see things that aren't quite human but are close, it, like something primal in us wants us to get away from it. So you can use that kind of description and have some images of like really unsettling, uncanny valley effects to creep people out, and that could really kind of elevate or build the mood. Now, if you want to use this more of as a villain, right? Cold and calculated is the big thing here, right? It is all about logic. You can go, the extreme capitalism route where, they're destroying towns because the town existing costs them more money than not having it. You can have things like in this land, they have a maximum age for every race, and that maximum age is determined by the age at which they work less efficiently. So they just, once you get to a certain age, they can either disguise it, right? Like maybe at a certain age, you get called up to a higher calling and you come up to the palace and then no one ever comes back from the palace. So you don't, no one knows really what's going on. Or you can be more overt with it where they're, just killed in the streets, depending on how extreme you want to be in your game. You can have things like brutal quotas that if they aren't met, bad things happen. Like if a town doesn't supply enough meat to whatever cause, then they take people and they grind them up and make them extra meat, Soylent Green kind of style. You can, really just dive into the cold, numbers focused kind of entities. They will get what they need, whatever means it is, whatever rule they set will be followed to the letter of the law, no exceptions. So rather extremes, depending on what severity you want to have with this is up to you. But there are plenty of examples of atrocities being committed by many different real life organizations, typically military in structure, due to a requirement to follow orders, or terrible things will often happen to them awful things do occur. So you can use a lot of those kind of things as an example. I wouldn't encourage you to read too much about, war crimes and things, as it would probably really bum you out. But I mean, I'm pretty sure we've all are aware of quite a few that have happened during our lifetimes. So, you don't have to draw on them necessarily. Again, it really heavily depends on the tone of your game. You can do this character real silly, just kind of unnerving, or you can go down a really dark place, really have a very difficult conversation with your party. It really depends on the style of game you have. Personally, I like to keep my games on a lighter tone with a much darker subtext. So I probably wouldn't go to the extreme of having people like killed in the streets and things. It would kind of be something that they would discover was happening, but wouldn't directly be, demonstrated in the game. Like, I wouldn't have, like, a scene where people are being, like, beheaded in this town square or something because they're too old or something extreme like that. I would be a lot more, light with the touch if I was gonna explore something like that. But again, some people really like getting into the really dark, gritty fantasy. There's nothing wrong with that. The Witcher setting is incredibly popular, and the Witcher setting is, inspired by that very dark, gritty fantasy kind of genre. So clearly, there are people that are very into it, and I don't, so if that's your jam and that's what your group is doing, then by all means, this is a very good way of doing it. But I'm worried I'm getting into topics that will get me got on YouTube, so I think I'm going to just go over real quickly the subclass features and call it a day. So restore the balance, right? I think it's really interesting ability because it gets rid of advantage and disadvantage, right? So it's all about making sure everyone's on the same playing field. So if you want to take order and take it to an extreme good kind of situation, equity, right? Everything being fair, everyone having the same opportunities, and ensuring that people have what they need. So, there's that famous picture. I'll probably, if I could find it, it'll be on the screen now. Equity being the fence is so high, everyone gets a different size box so that they all can look over the fence. That kind of mindset, you can do a very good version of that. You don't have to go evil like we were discussing a minute ago. Fashion of law, shielding people. Again, you can be a very good thing, right? Shielding those of lower station, helping, those that are less fortunate. I know in my experience, right, typically the youngest or less senior member of our team would be the one that was treated the best, and the more senior members were kind of expected to help out the newer people to make the newer people's time as easy as possible, because that way the expectation would be is once someone else is new that joins, you would take care of them much like the people before you took care of you, and that was something we did in a few groups I was a part of. So you can kind of use that mentality to kind of explain the bastional of law ability. Strengths of order, rolling always a 10 or better. Consistency key, right? Order, bureaucracy makes you consistent because it's the same process every time. You can use that as kind of the inspiration for that ability. The Clockwork Concave, if you're playing this class at 18th level, I'd be surprised, but maybe you want to use this ability if it's like a boss or something. Being able to delegate effectively, as a sign of leadership, and obviously, a position of privilege was something that we mentioned pretty early on, someone of station. Now, I haven't really talked about the spell choices and things I picked. I've only exclusively picked buffs when I was doing this. Now, I think that's an incredibly interesting way to play a character that doesn't directly ever attack anyone and only does things to help other people because it's like beneath them to get their hands dirty. And it's, the jobs of the underlings to do that. Uh, it worked pretty well in practice. It wasn't optimal. So if you're playing in a super optimal play style, might not be the best. But in general, it was pretty good. Like, I took things like haste, twin spelling things like haste can be a pretty big freaking deal. And then just doing buffs and debuffs, and then kind of going and hiding, basically, not wanting to get blood on yourself, staying away from the enemies is all, what you should be doing as a sorcerer, anyways. You're incredibly squishy, but having like a reason and character to not want to be near the gross monster I think it just kind of helps you out a little bit, and I think it makes it narratively funny instead of you being like, "Oh, I don't wanna get hit because I don't wanna lose concentration." Instead, just being like, "That thing's slimy and gross, and I don't want its disgusting scent on my uniform." It's the same thing, but it's the way you role play it is a lot more funny. I think I did a really nasally voice. I think I talked more up here, and I was like, "Yes, peasants." I had my, bodyguard, I think our fighter was, like, my bodyguard. I would do the little claps, the things like that, snapping. Everything you could imagine someone really rude would do to a waiter in America. I used a lot of that. A lot of Karen energy, I guess, got poured into that character. Yeah, I don't know, it was it was a pretty dumb character. It went pretty well. The fighter thought it was really funny. They were happy because they were getting insane buffs. I think we were playing, like, 8th or ninth level. I'm pretty sure I had 4th or 5th level spells, and I was just buffing them and the other players a ton, so they were all happy because they were getting really good support, so they were being able to pull off really cool stuff. The character was a bit annoying and silly, but it was only like a one shot, so it didn't get too annoying. I think you'd have to dial it down a bit if you were gonna do this long term, as, I don't think your party members are gonna put up with you. But if again, if you're it's for an NPC that joins the party, making them insufferable so they don't wanna keep them around is a good idea. If you just wanna have someone that helps them out maybe early game, but you don't want them to stick around too long, you really don't wanna kill off characters because or, like, betray them with the character. Just making them an insufferable person is another way to, solve that problem. So there you go. There's a suggestion for you all. But this video is running a little long, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off. Thank you for watching. If you thought the Mechanus Clockwork inspired character was interesting, please let me know down in the comments below what aspect of the character really stuck out to you, what ideas you got from this video, how it inspired you. And please go ahead and like the video as well. It helps more people see it. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.